for big rockets, too.
Well, Dr. von Braun, how would you say we stand in relation to the Russians, and do you think we can ever catch up?
I'm convinced that in the space field, the Russians are ahead of us, particularly in large weightlifting capability.
Roger.
At the moment, the problem is not so much to catch up, but first build up the working speed that they have already demonstrated. After we are running as fast as they do, there's still a considerable gap to close, and only the future will tell whether we'll manage to close that gap.
You are go. Water systems, go. Range operations, Mercury capsule, go. All pre-start panel lights are correct. The ready light is on.
The pointer has swung sharply to the Russian side. Sputnik 1 is in the air.
A 180-pound satellite named Sputnik. Just like that, the Russians struck the first blow in a race unlike any the world had ever seen, the race for space.
Well, Dr. Newell, what about the vital question that everybody is thinking about? Why and how did the Russians beat us to the draw?
There's a Cold War going on. There's a competition between two opposing systems, and both of them have lots of nuclear weapons pointed at each other. So when Sputnik came along, this was a shock to the system. Both the Soviets and the Americans were both talking at the time about sending up a satellite. And the Soviets realized it was important to do it first. And we were shocked. How could this have happened? We're technologically superior to the Soviets, and they beat us into space, and it scared the hell out of people.
Well, there's very profound concern here, Doug, about world opinion. The dominant conflict of our time, the Cold War, is at present, as everyone knows, in a state of balance between Russia and the West, and in between are those people who are called uncommitted, who may determine who wins, the peoples of Asia, the Near East, and Africa. Russia already enjoys one great attraction for these important peoples, and their ambition is to pull themselves up from primitive agrarian countries to become modern industrial nations. They tend to admire Russia as a nation which was once as backward as they, but which did pull herself up. And now that backward Russia has beaten the West's most advanced nation into the fringes of outer space, their admiration for Russia can be expected to increase.
In the tightest clutches of the Cold War, Sputnik played on the most overreaching fear of the time.
If they could put something into space, they could drop a warhead on us.
Probably no one here in the nation's capital would disagree with one thing that Senator Wiley said. We had better get on our toes.
Immediately, there was pressure on Eisenhower to do something. And there was this existing institution called NACA. And they decided this is probably where we have the technical expertise to do something in space. And then, as it evolved, it was decided this is going to be a civilian agency. The thinking was that we need to do this in public. We need to do this before the entire world. The Soviets are doing everything in secret. The geopolitical forces that were driving this was that, if we do this first and we do it in the open, we're going to gain enormous international prestige. Lyndon Johnson, who went on to be president, was a big promoter of space, and he pushed legislation through. In '58, NASA's created. They've got stuff on the drawing board for a one-man spacecraft, which came to be called Project Mercury.
We have one of the most challenging assignments that has ever been given to modern man.
In the fall of 1958, NASA's first administrator, T. Keith Glennon, approved Project Mercury with the goal of sending a man into space and bringing him home safely. And do it before the Russians do it. But first, NASA needed a spacecraft. Specifications were sent to 20 companies. 11 bid on the highly prized contract. And in January 1959, St. Louis-based McDonnell Aircraft Corporation was picked to build what had never been built before.
This was irresistible. This was a chance to do something that had never been done.
We were just basically out of college. I just graduated a year before.
I was a part of the electrical power and sequential system. I followed Mercury from the very beginning after the contract was signed in 1959, January.
What they really asked McDonnell to do was to take the warhead off of a ballistic missile and put on the spacecraft that we were designing and building in St. Louis. We were given the shape, the basic shape of it, and here's a blank piece of paper. You do what you have to do to put a man in it, launch him, and bring him back safely.
Everything was new. We had to design all our own test equipment. We had to decide what kind of tests we wanted would make sense to make sure that that spacecraft was man-worthy.
At the time, you could test for the temperature, the vibration, the noise, the acoustics. We could simulate that, but you could not simulate the weightless condition. That was the big problem. No one knew. Some of the medical community said 2 hours weightlessness, you'll get bloodshot eyes, your eyeballs might even pop out, your intestines might burst.
It was an unknown, inevitable risk that would fall on a courageous few, test pilots known collectively as the Mercury 7.
These men, the nation's Project Mercury astronauts, are here after a long and perhaps unprecedented series of evaluations which told our medical consultants and scientists of their superb adaptability to their coming flight.
Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, Alan Shepard, and Deke Slayton.
You cannot emphasize how competitive these 7 guys were. I mean, they were like brothers, but every one of them thought, I'm the best. I should get the first flight, and then I should get the first orbital flight. It's the height of the Cold War. So, these guys were cold warriors.
The Mercury 7 became instant celebrities. And for those engineering the country's first manned spacecraft, the pressure to deliver was reinforced as the all-seeing eyes of the press descended on their work.
We couldn't hardly get to work. The traffic was unbelievable. There was every TV station, every radio station, and every tourist in the world, it looked like, was on the beach.
It was intense. We knew that we were behind. We had a job to do, and it continued throughout the program because we were behind all the way. We were behind on Mercury. Russia had such tremendous launch capability, and they could lift payloads much heavier than we could.
We thought these Russians were 10 feet tall.
They were kicking our ass. We were blowing up rockets left and right.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime pal. Send me a kiss by wire. Oh, baby, my heart's on fire. If you refuse me, honey, you'll lose me. Then you'll be left alone. Baby, telephone and tell me I'm your own.
In the newspapers, we'd cover these very well and say, you guys must be nuts thinking you're going to put a man on here. You can't even get the things off the ground yet.
The attitude among American people was, my God, he's going to get on that thing and they're going to light it. All of a sudden, Yuri Gagarin, this Russian pilot, is launched into space in early '61, so they're ahead of us again.
When Gagarin, when he went up there and they said, that was a low point. That's when we went on the 18-hour days, 7-day weeks. When you were testing and you had a problem, you didn't leave until that problem was solved or you had a method of solving it. One time, I went to work Monday morning, came home 2 weeks later.
There was no such thing as, well, it's 4 o'clock, we're going home. Things that looked like they were going to work on paper, once we put them into those vacuum chambers and started testing, we went back, had to go back and redesign. These were difficult, really difficult.
We had young families, and the wives had to raise the kids. That's just what it amounted to, and they'd get tired, and I can see why they would. You just had time to come home, get a meal, go to bed, get up, and go back to work.
The wives were struggling with the little kids. We all had small children, and they never saw us. We'd leave before the kids get up in the morning, and sometimes we wouldn't be home. That was probably one of the biggest challenges down there, and it caused a lot of divorce.
They calculated that of the 300 engineers that McDonnell Aircraft sent down there, the HR guy calculated 48% of them ended up divorced.
For we engineers, we were so focused on getting this job done. Fortunately, I had a wife that suffered through all this here. When you're starting your family and a new program, it causes some problems.
Our man in space, Alan Shepard, was awakened shortly after 1 a.m. this morning. And from then on, it was a quickening pace of tenseness and anxiety. 5:20 a.m. and astronaut Alan B. Shepard, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy, enters the Mercury space capsule that he hopes to ride into space, with the hopes of America riding with him.
They close the door and it goes clam, you know, and they lock her up. And from then on, the tension starts rising and rising, and it's you could just, it's palatable. You could cut it with a knife.
The countdown was so long, we wondered if it was ever going to get gone. He was up on the spacecraft for something like 5 hours.
I don't think anybody could breathe. There was no talking. There was nothing.
We had a guy that couldn't sit down at his console. There, he just couldn't get it, and so they had to hold him and take him off, and somebody else took his place there. And it lasted 30 minutes. The tension just got to him.
Roger, ready to resume the count. STE, I'm going to turn it over to Stoney, verify. Resume the count. Okay, Stoney, take it over. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right, lift off and the clock is started. Fuel is go, 4G, 5.5 Kevin, oxygen go, all systems are go. On the periscope, what a beautiful view. Okay, suspend 7. And speed build up. 3, 6, 9, 45,000 feet now. Main chute is reefed. Main chute is green. The main chute is coming unreefed and it looks good. The main chute is good. Rate of descent is reading about 35 feet per second.
"15 minutes after liftoff, Alan Shepard had returned from space. 27 minutes after, he was riding the deck of an aircraft carrier in the Caribbean alongside his cone-shaped spacecraft.
It was absolute elation, you know, when it was successful, completely successful. We were in space, and that was only 23 days after Gagarin's flight.
There he is as he emerges from the plane. He is met by Grissom and Slayton. They are the pilots on the two sides of him there. And Captain Hugh May, the commander of the base. He greets Shorty Powers.
Ted Sorensen, JFK's speechwriter and closest advisor, sat down with him after Alan Shepard's first flight and said, "We got to do something. We got to catch up. What can we do?" And the consensus was, based on our technical capabilities and a time frame, that we could